Every single day, thousands of young, brilliant, capable Nigerians look around their neighborhoods, pack their lives into a suitcase, and catch a flight or brave a long, treacherous overland route down south to Johannesburg, Pretoria, or Cape Town. And on the surface, the public narrative is quick to label this purely as a migration issue or an immigration crisis, even in South Africa. But if we want to be honest, we have to look past the surface symptoms. This isn't merely about people moving, this is about structural displacement. It is about what happens when a state fails to convert unimaginable natural wealth into basic human security. Think about Nigeria's economy right now. We aren't just talking about a bit of financial hardship, we are looking at an aggressive macroeconomic pincer movement. On one side, you have galloping inflation that dilutes the purchasing power of the average family down to nearly nothing every single month. On the other side, look at the brutal paradox of the oil sector. Nigeria is one of the continent's largest petroleum producers, yet because of decades of structural failure to build functioning domestic refineries, the country now exports raw crude and imports expensive refined petroleum products. When the state tries to manage this by tinkering with or removing fuel subsidies, the shockwaves hit the cost of transport, food, and electricity instantly. The money from that oil does not settle in the communities where the oil is drilled, nor does it fund public schools or state-of-the-art hospitals in Lagos or Kanu. It vanishes into specialized political funding loops. Add to this the reality of localized insecurity that manifests as banditity, agricultural disruption, and systemic kidnapping networks across major transit corridors. The calculation for a young Nigerian becomes simple. Staying home is a mathematical risk to my survival. So, how do they even get to South Africa? The administrative pathways vary. Many enter completely legally. They obtain scarce, highly sought after visitor visas or corporate permits or student visas issued by the South African Department of Home Affairs. They arrive with dreams of building corporate careers, launching legitimate tech startups, or investing in retail. But here is where the institutional machinery breaks down. Because the South African asylum and visa renewal system has faced massive administrative backlogs, a highly dangerous legal twilight zone emerges. A migrant enters, sometimes legally, their document expires, and then they find themselves trapped in an endless loop of waiting for renewals that take months or even years to process. However, when individuals consciously choose to bypass the paperwork entirely, when they intentionally overstay their visas without declaring their presence to the state or engaging the proper administrative channels, it causes a deep systemic strain. It actively undermines the very architecture of South African law. More importantly, it directly displaces the legal migrant community who do things by the book, throwing a blanket of suspicion over thousands of honest, hardworking professionals. More importantly, it degrades the sovereign legal protection that South African citizens are fundamentally entitled to in their own country. The absolute guarantee that their borders are managed under the rule of law. Now, let's look at what happens when these parallel lives collide with the local economy in South Africa. If you look at formal state structures, the South African government utilizes highly deliberate economic levers like broad-based black economic empowerment and strict localization procurement set-asides. These laws are explicitly designed to reserve specific government tenders, infrastructure projects, and corporate supply chains for historically disadvantaged South African citizens. It is a protective economic wall because foreign nationals face total exclusion from these formal state backed procurement structures. Their economic survival naturally migrates to where the state's eye tends to be the weakest, the massive, high velocity, informal retail sector. We are talking about the township spaza shop economy, an informal market ecosystem with hundreds of billions of rands annually. This isn't just a collection of small corner shops. It is a sophisticated, hyper efficient logistical network. Step by step, foreign networks, including specific groups of Nigerian entrepreneurs, have deeply integrated themselves into these supply chains. They don't only run individual shops, they actually consolidate buying power. They negotiate massive bulk discounts from wholesale distributors and manage highly organized cross border logistics. But this massive concentration of cash and unregulated trade has a dark, predatory underbelly. When an economy exists entirely outside formal banking systems, it becomes an attractive target for co optation by criminal syndicates. And this is how it becomes a story of institutional rot. Let's consider how specific transnational syndicates operate. They don't survive despite the law, they survive through it by systematically corrupting local institutional actors. Look at the mechanics. Syndicates co opt corrupt municipal officials to issue fraudulent business trading licenses. They pay off compromised officers with the South African Police Service and the Department of Home Affairs to look the other way when undocumented retail networks or illicit supply yards are established. There are documented cases where entire illicit distribution hubs, handling everything from counterfeit consumer goods to illicitly trafficked precursor substances, and they operate in plain sight because local police stations receive regular financial stipends from these networks. When a municipality or a police unit accepts a bribe to validate an illegal operation, they aren't just taking a kickback. They are actively dismantling the security of their own neighborhoods. They are selling out the local South African shopkeeper who cannot compete with an unregulated syndicate backed supply chain that pays zero taxes and operates completely outside consumer safety laws. To truly understand why this happens, we have to look at the massive architectural differences in how these two nations are governed. Nigeria and South Africa look like democracies on paper, but their operational systems are worlds apart. Nigeria operates under a federal structure that is profoundly executive heavy. Think of it as a system where vast power and economic control are concentrated right at the very top of the pyramid, right? Specifically within the residency and the Federal Executive Council. Under the old constitutional arrangements and the current realities of the Federation account, the federal government collects nearly all of the country's massive oil revenues. It then redistributes this money down to the states based on a rigid political formula. Because the executive branch holds immense discretion over how these funds are allocated, how contracts are awarded, and how state agencies operate, the legislature often struggles to act as a genuine check on power. Creates a system where subnational states are financially dependent on Abuja rather than developing their own local economies. The accountability link between the citizens' tax money and the government's performance is completely severed because the state runs on oil wealth, not citizen taxation. Now, contrast that against South Africa's constitutional system. South Africa is a unitary state, but its entire governance model is anchored on absolute constitutional supremacy. The Constitution is an active, aggressive legal weapon. The judiciary, led by the Constitutional Court, possesses immense structural independence and regularly strikes down executive decisions made by the president or the cabinet. Furthermore, Chapter 9 institutions like the Public Protector and the Auditor General are structurally funded and legally mandated to investigate state corruption independently. When a South African government department mismanages public funds, the Auditor General publishes the exact figures openly, giving civil society and the media the precise data they need to launch massive legal challenges. In Nigeria, the power flows outward from the executive office. In South Africa, the power is deliberately fragmented and bound by a dense web of judicial accountability mechanisms. Whether they work or not is still something that we are figuring out, because one day at a time. So, what do we do about this? If you're a citizen listening to this inside Nigeria, you cannot simply look at migration as an escape hatch. Leaving your country because your leaders refuse to govern effectively is not a sustainable national strategy. You have to realize something fundamental. The true power to fix Nigeria does not belong to the politicians in Abuja. It belongs entirely to you, the citizen, standing on your own soil, not running away from the challenges of your country. You are there for a reason. To stop forced economic displacement, Nigerian citizens must demand structural, institutional, and legal reforms. Here are some actionable strategies to at least try to make this happen. Firstly, citizens must mobilize to demand formal legal frameworks that force Budget Office of the Federation and the Nigerian National Petroleum Company, or the NNPC, to publish broken down real-time transaction data. Organizations like Budget have shown what is possible with digital tracking, but it cannot remain a voluntary civil society effort. You must pressure your National Assembly representatives to pass laws making it a criminal offense for any state enterprise to hide oil revenue allocations. The data must show exactly how many nairas leave the Federation account and precisely which local government infrastructure project they land in. If the money doesn't appear as tarmac on a road or equipment in a clinic, the legal framework must trigger automatic independent prosecution. Then, the financial umbilical cord to Abuja must be legally altered. Citizens must champion constitutional reforms that allow states to retain a significantly higher percentage of their locally generated revenue and natural resources. This would force state governors to actually build functional local economies and attract real investments and even create jobs for the youth, rather than simply traveling to Abuja every single month to collect an oil check. When a local government has to rely on its citizens' productivity for its tax base, it is suddenly forced to protect and invest in those citizens. Think about it. Finally, the EFCC and the Independent Corrupt Practices Commission must be structurally separated from executive influence. Currently, the leadership of these anti-graft agencies serves at the pleasure of the president. Citizens must demand legislative amendments that place the appointment and funding of these watchdogs under independent judicial and civil society panels. The head of the anti-corruption unit cannot be fired by the executive. They can finally investigate the executive heavyweights who are bleeding your nation dry. Building a country takes immense, unyielding work. It requires moving past mere frustration and engaging in the cold, hard mechanics of institutional reform. You must demand that your laws protect your borders, that your leaders account for every single barrel of oil, and that your economies serve the people born within them. Stop running away from the systemic failures and start dismantling them. Don't run away from the challenge because you think that your life will be much easier in South Africa. It won't. There are tons of problems here that South Africans are trying to fix themselves. What would be better, though, is if Nigeria and South Africa could unite as economic powerhouses, trading innovation instead of exporting trauma. By forcing accountability at home, we all build an African continent where migration is a choice, not a desperate escape. Let's fix the foundations of our countries starting today, whether you are a Nigerian in Nigeria or a Nigerian in South Africa. This message is for you.